Hello, and welcome back around the bonfire. It is a pleasure to welcome you in on what was maybe one of the first nice days in Chicago we've had all year. So the vibes are high, the spirits are good. We are once again here to talk a little bit of Chicago Fire football. And as always, I am joined by the best in the business, though some may say there aren't too many in the business. So what does that really mean? But anywho, of course, joined by Tim. Tim, how you feeling?
How's the back of your hand feeling after that compliment right there, John?
Well, hey, I'm just being honest. Yeah, I would fall into that category.
No,
too.
fair. I'm not taking it personally, but you missed the episode where we recapped the game against Atlanta, and basically the thing that the guys that were in the crowd for that were saying is they were all sunburnt because it was a nice day then, and we are all as a group fairly pasty. So that's what happens when we are touched by the sun, even remotely, without like 17 layers of sunscreen.
Wait, you mean there's a bunch of white guys who watch MLS? Shocking. Especially in the Midwest of all.
And a bunch of white guys on a podcast. Like, that's never been done before. That's why we're so groundbreaking.
Yeah, that's why we're so good at what we do. Speaking of good at what we do, we have the guy who knows all the things nobody should know, and his mood is entirely dictated by whether or not he's had pizza. Fingers crossed. DJ, how are we feeling today?
I mean, I had New England clam chowder for lunch, so I'm good.
Who is he? This man lives in Florida, and he's eating New England clam chowder.
Listen,
all right.
Publix makes good New England clam chowder, and when you combine it with bread, it's God almighty amazing.
Maybe the single most cursed thing I've ever heard, and I would like to forget that I heard it. So instead, we're going to move on. We're going to talk a little ball. We have some exciting things to discuss this week as Chicago Fire head down to I got to be honest with you. I don't know what North Carolina would be considered, the Tar Heel state, I suppose. Head down to North Carolina to take on Charlotte FC. They face Dean Smith's squad, headed by the one and only Wilfred Zaha. But we do have a little bit of news to get into before we talk ball for real. Today, the NFL released their schedule. Chicago Bears obviously announcing all their home games, which can certainly impact Chicago Fire. So, Tim, I know you've got an article up on the site already. We'd love to toss to you. Tell us a little bit about what we can expect this fall.
Yeah, so the Fire coming in could have had as many as 6 matches moved, which would have been far more. The record is 3. It looks like it will be 3. Interestingly, the only regular season Bears game that's going to impact the Fire is their season opener, which is sort of unfortunate, but that will be the last game that's impacted. So that's the game against the New England Revolution, September 6th. Unfortunately, it looks like the Bears' 2 preseason games this year will both conflict with Fire home games. So that's the August 9th game against LAFC, although that is still to be officially confirmed. And the August 16th game, well, the game against LAFC is confirmed. The Bears are listing the date, location, and time of that first game as TBD, but they're hosting it. So we're assuming. And the game against St. Louis on August 16th will have to be moved because of a Bears preseason game too, which is just unfortunate for the Derby. Like it's a budding, local rivalry. The Fire, played the first game of that series at SeatGeek, and it was a fun cup game. But I think that having more people and a better atmosphere, which Soldier Field could provide in this kind of a match, it's unfortunate that we're not getting that.
Yeah, I think there's some interesting concepts, just generally speaking, about the stadium. I think maybe that's something that either when we have like the Leagues Cup break or off season, we can spend some more time talking about, because we've talked about it, we've flirted with it on the show before, but there's a lot to discuss there, right? Not only for the Fire's current predicament, but what the future could look like. And you talk about potentially missing out revenue, missing out people on a stadium of 20,000. That's not nothing. Certainly not nothing in MLS. So just something to kind of think about and toy a bit with there. As far as we know right now, no real updates on any kind of injury news. We'd expect the folks who have been working their way back in will continue to do so. But guys, correct me if I'm wrong, no real news on like Leo Barroso or anyone of that ilk back yet. Though we do expect Chris Beatty to be back after serving his 1-game suspension for the red card.
I know Alex and Joe Chats both posted that Barroso and Teron, I want to say, were in team rehab today. I want to say that's what they were.
Yeah, they were, and Alex posted a photo of them on the bike along with Chris Mueller, which is good to see. But I mean, that that means they're not going to be playing for this one. And if they're not training with the team yet, it also means they're probably not going to be playing with the team next week.
Yeah, I do want to say though, just because you mentioned that, TJ, shout out Chris Mueller. It's been great to see him back around the facility. I know he hasn't necessarily been away from the team, but hopefully this means that we'll hear more on him returning soon. So, shout out to him. Hope all is well, and hope that trends in the right direction. We can get him back on the field soon. Be good to have him back. Um, Moving on to a little bit of actual football talk. As mentioned before, Chicago head down to Charlotte this week, heading to one of the other NFL stadiums in MLS to take on Charlotte FC. Tim, I'll kind of toss to you to kick us off here. What do you think we can expect to see, kind of big picture from Charlotte as the Fire head down this weekend?
Yeah, so the big, thing from last year when they installed Dean Smith as head coach was he made the team defensively incredibly solid. But the sort of knock against them was like, their offense is like kind of middling. Then they went out and signed Wilfred Zaha, and I think nobody really thought it was going to be like, okay, well, problem solved. But people were expecting a lot more from them. But it turns out that soccer is not that simple of a sport. And what we ended up seeing is so far, Charlotte's defense has not looked bad per se, but certainly nothing like the elite defense that I think we thought they were going to have coming into this one. And I think that has made them look a lot more vulnerable. And at the same time, like Zaha's been solid. Like he looks like a good pickup. I don't think he looks like the pickup that you would have thought Wilfred Zaha coming into MLS could have been just a couple of years ago, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, just for posterity's sake, Charlotte currently trailing Orlando 2-1 as we record this 61st minute. If they lose today, it would be their fourth straight loss in MLS. Charlotte, a team typically pretty strong at home. They've been 5-1-0, so you would expect to see a stronger performance than maybe they're putting up on the road in Orlando tonight. To that end, though, you talk about being defensively solid. I think what stood out to me has not been Wilfred Zaha's performance. You look at Pep Biel playing in the middle, 6 assists, 3 goals on the year. This is, in a lot of ways, a fairly high-powered attack, right? Between Pep Biel, Leo Labata, Wilfred Zaha. They've got 10 goals between them, another 6 assists. Brant Bronico also chipping in some goal contributions from midfield. So kind of interesting to see how that's going to line up. I think we'll talk a little bit more about what the Fire can expect, but it is a touch concerning thinking about the Fire's current fullback predicament when you talk about having that kind of danger on the wings. And of course, with Patrick Ogimang up top, who, although he hasn't had the best MLS campaign, we know the quality of player he is, right?
Well, we certainly know there's like a big target center forward. And you just talked about the midfield with like midfielders that can get the ball to a good big target center forward. And that's not really something that you want to hear when you're not playing with your first choice center backs and, potentially, like, we don't know, but like a realistic possibility that it could be a 17-year-old's, third appearance in MLS for at least some of the minutes, or 16-year-old turning 17 in a couple weeks. So like, not ideal. At the same time, like I said, they haven't been as dangerous as I really expected them to be, and it's kind of becoming a running issue with them.
Yeah, looking back over the last few games, like we said, 2-1 right now with Orlando. Assuming all finishes there, they'll go in league play. 2-1 loss to Nashville, 4-2 loss to Columbus, 1-0 loss to New England. And then if you go all the way back, they did win 3-0 against San Diego. I think, DJ, this is something you brought up in kind of the outline in the pregame of this. Do wonder, a team coming off, potentially back-to-back very disappointing losses, returning home where they've had strong form. Are we at all concerned of a potential setup for a Nashville repeat, right? Especially depending on how the Fire are feeling, right? Depending on who we roll out on that right side of the defense. Do you guys see any kind of potential for another performance like that? Or not 7-2, right? But a convincing loss for a team that has something to prove at home?
I'd say if you're the Fire, that's the thing you're most terrified of, and that's why I don't think it happens. The Fire, the big problem with Nashville, the aftermath was, how did the Fire bounce back? And they've bounced back pretty much perfectly, albeit not as great as you want. I mean, drawing Orlando when you're down a man and keeping the clean sheet despite the man being down as a goalkeeper, having a goalkeeper that hasn't played in MLS in ever, stepping in, I mean, that's pretty good. all things considered. So I don't think
it's kind of ironic
mentally gone. So I don't think this is going to be a Nashville situation. Thank God.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe one of the storylines that we're on the lookout for is like, did the team use that as a galvanizing moment rather than a moment that is splitting the team apart? And is that going to propel them to not make the mistakes like that ever again? And the other thing is, like, we're watching this game right now against, like Charlotte's game against Orlando, ironically, and like I've just been thinking, like, where the heck was this team in purple with like the slick on ball movements, being able to like pick the right moments to press forward? Like they're just carving between Charlotte's lines, and this is theoretically one of the best defenses in MLS. Like, where was that Orlando team when the Fire played them? And I think that says something about how well the Fire did in that game. It's like Luis Muriel is getting into the box, it feels like, every 90 seconds or so. Or if he's not getting in, he's at least having a good look around it, or like they're getting balls into dangerous areas and laying off cross, or they're like 2 passes shy of an amazing opportunity all the time. And like, that is a team that the Fire basically kept from getting anything going forward for 90 minutes.
Yeah. And I think there's kind of an interesting aspect to this too, right? I think, Tim, you talked a little bit about defense has been a little bit underwhelming. You look at that back line, captained, not necessarily literally, but the main guy being Tim Ream, next to Jaleel Marshall-Rutty. And I do think there's an aspect of this. Watching this game against Orlando, coming into it, I think I told you guys this right when we got on earlier. I was kind of expecting them to perform well against Orlando because it's a slower team, but I think Tim Ream's a smart player. I think they can, when they're out of possession, if it's a little more focused on penetrating as opposed to transitioning, they might stand better. But to your point, Orlando has just looked slick. They've looked clean. They've looked faster. And so it's going to be interesting to see how Greg kind of deploys that, right? We talk a lot about the Fire playing a very possession-based system, but when we've seen the offense be at its most potent, it's kind of been in that, and I apologize for being the guy who always brings up the same thing, but it's the best reference I have in my own brain of like kind of peak Deserby Brighton, where it's the idea is you're drawing in the defense to create counterattacking chances. And I just wonder how much of this is going to be, are we going to give Brian Gutierrez, Philip Sinkernagel, Jonathan Bamba a chance to really just penetrate inside and potentially set up Hugo Kuipers? Because those opportunities very well may be there for the taking, as opposed to just trying to push the ball and create opportunities to score in transition.
Yeah, for sure. And, I think that I was before this game worried about Tim Ream just because of his experience, his physical presence. Just, he can be a wall that feels like it's like, 8 feet tall and 20 feet wide sometimes. And so far in this game and from some of Charlotte's other recent games, it seems like he's lost a step from the Tim Ream that we're thinking of in our heads and the Tim Ream that we even saw last year for Charlotte. Like it's starting to feel like maybe the way that he's like a wall is increasingly in his mobility and not in the other aspects that we were talking about.
Yeah. And I do hope, or I do think, I guess, from my perspective, I think there's an aspect of Hugo's game that could be particularly detrimental, I think, to the way we might play, right? He is somebody that I think if you asked him to, how do I phrase this? If you told me I needed somebody to take away a player, not necessarily based on athleticism, right? But just their knowledge, their skill, their understanding of positioning, all that kind of good stuff. I think Tim Ream would be a wonderful choice for that. In the same way, a guy like Carlos Terran is a good choice for that on the opposite side, right? Just in terms of pure athleticism, reaction abilities. I do wonder how much of that, the kind of unique way that Hugo plays, dropping so deep into the midfield, moving out to the wings, his willingness to be fluid kind of in possession, could really open up opportunities inside and out. We talked a little bit before we got on as well, not exactly strong at fullback either, right? So you've seen this team that is built around its wingers serving in to Brian Gutierrez and Hugo Kuipers, excuse me. And I think this could be a big game for either of them. It's going to be interesting to see how Charlotte actually tries to even out that playing field a little bit, because while they do have some advantage going forward, they also lose it coming back, it feels like.
Yeah, I'm not even, to be honest, 100% sure that I give it to them going forward. Although, this makes it sound like I'm really down on Charlotte. I think that they're not playing that well right now. And I still think that if this team can just fix some of those defensive mistakes, and like there's no time to do that, like a home game after you've been on the road. If they can do that, after 2 games on the road, they could suddenly be a team that is impossible to penetrate against, that's giving no quarters to any of the Fire's attackers. And that's just a radically different situation.
I think this will maybe transition a little bit to talking about the Fire defensively, right? But I think what you said there, I don't know. You said you don't know if you give them the advantage going forward. I think the place I might give it to them, right, is not necessarily purely in attacking talent. It's more so a little bit in the matchup, right? Like I've said a couple times, right? I've been impressed by Omari Glasgow. I think Jonathan Dean is a perfectly fine defensive fullback in MLS. I don't think he's special, but he's a guy you don't worry about too much defensively, at least. He obviously doesn't offer much going forward, but candidly, we're pairing up either of those guys with either Sam Rogers or Christopher Cupps. I'm kind of expecting Christopher Cupps just because Sam Rogers played last week, but we'll kind of see how that turns out. I don't know if an own goal means that he gets to start the next game, right?
Or that, maybe Berhalter will do a handshake thing with Dean Smith, and it's like, I'll start my 37-year-old center back if you'll start yours. Although Tim Ream has been starting anyways, and Omar Gonzalez hasn't been starting for the Fire.
Yeah, all due respect to Omar Gonzalez, I don't know if I'd put him on Tim Ream's level, even at the ripe age of 37. But yeah, I do worry a touch about kind of that matchup on the left side or on the right side of the Fire's defense. It'd be one thing coming down that left side. The nice thing is you have Jack Elliott to back up Andrew Gutman, but you just don't necessarily have that same kind of level of coverage for Omar Glasgow or Jonathan Dean, whoever happens to be starting this week.
And it's like, do you really want to? I mean, it is a very talented attack, right? Like any way that we put it, like we can say Zaha hasn't been as good as we thought that he might be, or like Pepiel hasn't been amazing this year, and all of that. But like, do you really trust Omari Glasgow to be able to come and provide coverage against Wilfred Zaha?
Yeah, I guess the thing is, like, I love your thought on this, because when I was kind of going through it, my thought was exactly defensively, I probably trust Jonathan Dean more, just in terms of like as being a stopper, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yes.
But I think what you get from Omari that you don't get from Dean is the recovery speed. And I think just somebody who can get in front of him and slow down the game until Mauricio Pineda can back him up, I think that could be really useful.
To be honest, I think that Dean's recovery speed is actually not that far off from Omari's, and I think that we get it a little bit into and I think that it's also Omari is going to be pushing up more, and so he will have to get back farther. The run would have to be farther because Omari's got more of it to do than I think Dean would in some situations. And I think that it's also a question of spacing, where like at times, Glasgow's improved significantly week over week with this. And it's like, we don't know what Omari we would see, and if he's really growing into that right wing back role more and more every week, but progress isn't linear, all that. But I think that you trust Dean not to make mistakes at a much higher level than you trust Omari not to make mistakes. With Omari, you're rolling the dice, and it's like, could he misunderstand the space that he's supposed to occupy because he's not used to coordinating space with center backs nearly to the same extent that he's being asked to right now. And something like that could end up costing the Fire, again, when like you're not 1,000% in love with a center back pairing that you're likely to be playing. Just, it's going to be some combination of Jack Elliott and either some level of inexperience with the league, right? Or Omar Gonzalez, which is like maybe like, too much experience with the league. And so, I think that that's an interesting challenge. I will say that the more that I'm saying this, it's like that just based on what we've seen from Greg lately, like the Fire are committing numbers forward. Like the Fire will commit 10 guys going forward early on with the game 0-0. And I think that is making me think that the way that he would rather play this is you start off, you rather try to get, 3 goals early or whatever, if you can, and then take Omari Glasgow off at like half at the 60th minute or whatever, and then see out the game that way, rather than play cautious from the start and like hope that you luck your way into a goal or two. Like Greg ball is go for it ball with the Fire.
Yeah, I think there's also, you talked, and I think you wound up in the same place I think I was thinking about it as you were saying all that. Like, you do maybe lose a little bit of the defensive reliability with Omari, but you also gain so much more going forward. I mean, the Fire don't win that game last week without Omari on the field, right?
Oh,
Jonathan Dean was not
100%.
making
Right.
that
And
pass, playing that ball, right? And his relationship with Philip Zinkernagel has been growing week in, week out. Obviously, we saw him with Marin last week, but you do just gain more going forward. So I think you're right, Tim. I would expect to see him start, and depending on the game state, maybe seeing Jonathan Dean late. To be candid with you, I would expect more so to see Andrew Gutman come off than Omar Glasgow at this point if the Fire have a lead, purely because, honestly, if you're asking me who's better defensively, I'm probably picking Omari Glasgow, which is maybe an insane thing to say, but I've not been impressed with Andrew Gutman's defensive performances ever, but not this year.
I haven't been as down as him as you are, but I mean, your point's well taken. Like, he is not the best right back at defending in this league, and no one's going to put him in that category.
And that's okay for what it's worth. I'm not saying he
Yeah.
shouldn't be starting week in, week out.
100%. I think that the thing that you've got to ask as well is just, can the Fire get up to that lead? Because that's the real challenge that they've had in some games, where if they don't get the right start, they've been able to recover, but like that, you don't want to make your only game plan. And I think, again, like Charlotte, we talked about their defensive issues. They've been very good at home. Ironically, the only time that the Fire have beaten Charlotte was the opening game between the two in Charlotte. So like that, I guess, bodes well for the Fire if you want to look at some omen from 3 years ago when there were like 3 or 4 similar players on the squads. But I think it just presents a challenge, right? Like, can the Fire look good for 90 minutes the way that they more or less did against Atlanta, right? Because we haven't seen that enough from this team.
Well, and that's a good, I think, point to transition fully into talking kind of some decisions for Greg, right? I think the one that jumps out to me that's most pressing, we've seen Romini Kwame making more and more appearances. He seems to be working back, if not all the way back at full fitness. It seems like Sergio Orhel and Brian Gutierrez are kind of slotted in as starters at this point. Certainly from a profile perspective, you would think Mauricio Pineda and Romini Kwame tend to be the most similar, though Kwame does offer a little bit more in the final third, maybe not necessarily going forward as a whole, because Mauricio has some really wonderful passing ability, but in the final third, I would still give the edge to Romanigue. So I guess long story short is, where do you see the midfield starting 3 come Saturday?
I think it's an interesting challenge. What?
Honestly, I'd say right now you keep it as is. I mean, if your first option on the bench is Kwame, and Kwame keeps playing like this, again, it's kind of one of those things where the starters are playing really well together. If the depth is at that level, that's great. That's exactly what you want the depth to be. To make a comparison, it's like Juninho back in 2017, where he's a damn player, but your first option off the bench is Juninho. That's a pretty good option to have off the bench. If everybody else is playing just as good, if not better, yeah. Plus, last week, he and Pineda did play really well together. I feel like if anybody goes off, it's going to be Orahel. But honestly, Orahel's playing so well that why not start all 3 again?
Yeah, I think that may well be where we end up. I think that if someone comes off, I mean, just in terms of like for like, right? Like, so, Brian Gutierrez, nobody really does what he does going forward the same way. Like, Sergio Orahel's closest, but he doesn't really do the same things in the same way, especially not like when you get closer in on net. Pineda is the one that you trust most, I think, on both sides of the ball of the trio. And I think that maybe the closest like for that is Kwame. And I think Sergio Orahel, like, he's doing better defensively, but there are times that you're just like, you're not a very big guy, and sometimes guys can just muscle you off the ball like you're not a very big guy. So I think that would be the question. I also kind of do wonder, we haven't gotten any official word about this, and for when we spoke to him after the game, Kwame said that he was fully healthy But I do sort of wonder with whatever the injury was that kept him out earlier, if there's some concern with giving him 90 minutes or significant match time. And if it's like working him up to that, where it's maybe a plan to sub a little bit earlier in the match and then see how he does and then go from there. But I mean, that's just pure speculation.
Yeah, I guess I kind of see it from the perspective, almost like the same conversation we were having about Amari, right? I do think, I'm a big believer in Mauricio Pineda, at that in that midfield role. I do think Kwame brings a little bit more dynamicism, right? If that's the best word to use for it, he's a little bit more of a dynamic player in that sense. Um, and I'd like to kind of see that pairing, right? I think maybe I'm a little higher on Sergio Orihel, generally speaking, and not that you guys are low on him by any means. Um, haven't viewed his defensive play as like a liability. Obviously, I would say he's not at a Mauricio Pineda level or at a Romani Kwame level, but I don't know that he's significantly worse than Brian Gutierrez, if at all. Right? I think his positioning has improved.
The thing is, this is the first year that we saw Brian Gutierrez demonstrate any real knowledge that defending was a part of a soccer player's job.
Absolutely.
So like, there's, if we're grading on that curve, but I mean, and I think that he's been fine and he hasn't made a mistake that I think has really been costly for the team. But I think that push comes to shove, right? Like Sergio Orihel is a guy that's going to give you some great line breaking passes going forward. He's going to potentially get a good look on goal or two. And be dangerous that way. He's not going to be occupying acres of space as like a destroying number 8. You know what I mean? Or like he would not be a great choice in a double pivot midfield, which is partly why he's not getting played in there. And I think that is again like why I just think that if someone is going to come off, it's probably Pineda, just because the close. I think the next midfielder to come on is Kwame. And I think that the closest like for like to go off is Maury Pineda. And there's the possibility, although we haven't seen him get played there by Greg, that you're thinking if center back becomes an issue again, do we want to have the possibility of putting Pineda in that spot? Not that he couldn't just switch over and you bring on a sub if he's already on, but then his fresher legs, his perspective's a little bit different, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I would say I kind of like that level of versatility. That's the thing is, I think more so just thinking this game particular, not necessarily for the whole of the season. I like the idea of Romani Kwame getting the start, right? I like the idea of him coming in, being able to be a little bit more aggressive. To your point, Tim, really selling out early and going for that big lead and then trying to hold it down. And then, you shift into, you bring in Mauricio Pineda around the 60th minute and you shift into kind of a back three out of possession, let him move back, play a little bit more passively. I see you holding up 3 fingers, but for the life of me, I can't tell if you're just mocking me.
And I just saw a very portly Orlando fan taking off his shirt because Orlando has once again scored.
Yeah, well, there you go. That should just about seal it for the Lions of Central Florida, as it were.
It was like a play from like FIFA on like an easy setting, where like I've never seen in a professional match someone have that much time alone in a box unless it's a PK situation.
Oh my God. Yeah. Tim Ream got put on skates. That's not yeah, I would say as genuinely as I can, like that does not bode well for Charlotte, especially considering they're playing midweek. So not exactly a great omen for those guys to now say, not only are our legs heavy, they're also tired.
If Tim Ream isn't fast enough to defend in this league on Wednesday, he's certainly not going to get faster by that Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think, again, ties back to my point of I like the athleticism, the dynamicism of someone like Romani Kwame starting in the midfield there. Next thing I thought worth talking about, we mentioned a little bit before, or I mentioned him briefly. Marin Haile Selassie, the last few times out, has looked like who we thought he could be when he came over and was purchased ultimately after the loan from Lugano. I wouldn't expect him to be starting, but I also wouldn't be shocked to see him play more than we expect, especially given that we haven't necessarily seen the stellar performance you would hope from a designated player signing in Jonathan Bamba, though I think he's been good. but he hasn't been world beating. And Philip Zinkernagel, on the other hand, has been playing like a man possessed in some ways. So, Tim, I don't know if you thoughts on the potential of seeing more Marin, or if we thinking he will just kind of be relegated to that bench role for the time being.
You know, I don't want to see Zinkernagel not starting, and I don't think we will this week, but it would not at all surprise me if we started seeing Marin Haile Selassie get more minutes as the season wears on. Like, the Fire are not playing in this midweek game, but midweek games are coming, like between, Open Cup, hopefully continuing for like a number of matches still, and the league. And Zinkernagel played half a year. We talked about this on our recap of Atlanta. Like, Zinkernagel played half a year before coming to the Fire, and he was not 100% healthy when he showed up. He missed some time. He's probably still not 100%, and he won't be until he has a proper offseason at the end of this MLS season. So I think that managing minutes, especially as the summer wears on, it gets hotter. His body gets increasingly tired as he sort of goes past the limit of what he would have been playing for a regular season in Europe. I think makes sense. And I just think that, like, Marin Haile Selassie, like, Marin has been making a textbook, like, this is like a textbook example of how you ask for more minutes when you're given some opportunities, right? Like, it was a midweek cup game, and he was flying, and he comes in fairly late off the bench and gets a goal that secures the team the win in league play that Saturday. Like, what else? Like, what better case could he possibly be making?
The only issue I see is if Barroso ends up coming back and he takes right back fully, the question then becomes Glasgow or Marin on the right versus the left. That's the only thing I see, honestly.
I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know that that's really a conversation, because candidly, I don't see Omari playing as a winger on this team, right? His skill set doesn't necessarily fit into the Berhalter definition of what a winger is, which is very much inverted and penetrating, as opposed to what we're seeing him play in that wingback kind of role, right? Overlapping, making the run outside, playing the ball in, and kind of being that recovery piece. So I don't expect.
Agreed.
When Barroso is back, I expect to see Jonathan Dean kind of be that full-time left back backup, and Omari probably playing a lot of right back backup.
Yeah, I think that that's what we'll see. And I think that, especially, it's for how good he was in very limited minutes, it was very limited minutes. I think that it's important to remember how young Leonardo Barroso is, and how grueling MLS can be, how physical the league can be, the travel, all of that stuff. And that's going to wear on someone, especially when they're struggling to get and stay healthy. We don't exactly know what the leg injury is. So I think that there will be minutes there for Omari, especially if, Barroso is doing what we saw him do, which is like a lot of really fast running. It's a big part of that game, and it's something that Omari can do too. I do think that it's a question if Marin also gets a look at one of those positions. I think there's a reasonable chance that maybe he could serve as a serviceable backup on that left back position as well, and kind of do more of the upside things than we get from Dean. But I think a lot of that's to be determined, and I don't think we're going to see it this weekend, one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. Only other thing I think worth mentioning, and this can be even a little more just A or B, but do we think Sam Rogers? Do we think Christopher Kups? I do wonder how much of Christopher Kups' first start was just a little bit of a feature, but there was an aspect of, in this game, how do I phrase? Like, we didn't necessarily trust the 17-year-old going up against, it was Orlando, correct? Am I making that up? Am I getting my games mixed up?
You are not.
Yeah. Going up against, Luis Muriel and Orlando. And now you're essentially asking him to go against Wilfred Zaha, who will be coming down that left side. But we've seen Sam Rogers, and one thing he does not handle well is a big physical player coming directly at him. We saw it with Christian Benteke. We saw it with Kevin Denke. So I do wonder how much. I wonder where that decision lines up. In my head, it almost is kind of begging for a Christopher Kups moment, and giving him that opportunity.
In my opinion,
And I think that, go ahead.
You start Kups, and at the 45th minute, depending on how he's doing, you either say, okay, you're going the whole game, or you sub him out for Rogers.
Yeah. And I think that that's probably the move. I was surprised we didn't see him last week. I think that there is going to be minute management and expectation management, not wanting to give him too much too fast. But, the things that Berhalter said about Rodgers, we talked about on the podcast, like it wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement while acknowledging the effort that Rodgers is putting in. So it does feel like a Cubs game.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think, we talked about it a little bit last time, but kid just has a different level of physicality, I think, than Sam Rodgers does. And he's not necessarily the most technical yet, as impressive as passing, his ball handling abilities. Kid was on
Yeah,
point in the limited minutes he saw. Well, limited minutes being
he's
90
gotten really
against
good.
Orlando, but
He's done well with ball handling and training and stuff like that. Is impressed. I know, like coaching and his like teammates with what he's been able to do, especially at that age. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's more upside with him, and like what's the downside? Like he could make a mistake that could lead to a goal from the opposition. Like that's sort of the thing that Rodgers is getting blamed for last week. Anyways, even if the own goal wasn't 100% his fault, still it's like you're not losing that by playing Rodgers. So I think that the upside is higher than the downside.
100%. Yeah. Last thing we'll kind of wrap with before we wrap things up here tonight, fellas. I will ask both of you for both a player to watch and your score prediction for Saturday. Feel free to include goal scores if you'd like. Tim, I'll toss to you first. Who's your guy and what's your score?
I am going to say a 2-1 victory. Let's say Hugo Kuipers and Jonathan Bamba breaks out of the slump.
Okay. And who's your player to watch?
Let's say Christopher Cupps, because I think that if he's playing for the Fire, that's going to be the way that the game goes. And I think for Charlotte, I'd say Christian Kalina, because he has been one of the best goalkeepers in the league in his time that he's been here, and has looked pretty mortal, and like arguably should have had better positioning on at least 2 of Orlando's goals midweek. And so if the Fire can make him look mortal, then it's a very different team than the one that the Fire played in 2024.
Yeah, absolutely. DJ, what about you? Who's your guy and what's your score?
I'm going to say I think the guy to watch right now is Bamba. He needs to have a really good game. He needs to get on that scoreboard. He needs to start doing the stuff. I'm also going to kind of cheat and add in Brian Gutierrez. Interesting fact. Guti has not gotten an assist in MLS yet. So I think both of them, this is the game where they need to start showing like all up on that scoreboard. They need to start doing everything they can to get on the board. I don't know. I feel like this game is going to end up being a loss, but I think the Fire are going to put up a very good fight. And if it's a loss, it's going to be less because the Fire don't finish their chances and more just because Charlotte just finds a way to do it. Charlotte offensively is not terrible, at least, but I think this is one of those games where at the same time it can flip around. The Fire can win pretty easily too.
Yeah. Tim, I think you said it before we started. They're only 3 points ahead of the Fire in the table. So these are 2 pretty even teams in that respect. I think maybe they have different profiles because of some coverage, but in terms of the actual quality and how they're playing, they've both been up and down, and they're both at about the same level. For me, I think guy to watch is going to be Omari. I think it's all going to kind of live and die on how he can defend against Wilfred Zaha coming down that left side or right side, depending on which way you're looking at it. And also how he's able to recover and play against Pep Biel, Patrick Ojimang, how he matches up as well. I think how Omari plays both defensively and those opportunities he's going to have going forward, given I don't know that Jaleel Marshall-Rutty is going to be the most stiff defense he's faced all year. Excuse me. So I think he's going to have opportunities to create down there, especially playing off of Philip Zinkernagel. So I would look for him to potentially be involved in the scoring, if not a goal, maybe an assist, right? Or playing the ball in that gets played to an assist. For my score, I'm gonna go 3-3 draw. I think the Fire defensively have not solved all their demons yet. I think Charlotte's going to come out hungry. They haven't won a league game in over a month at this point. They're playing at home. And I think there's one thing we've seen the Fire struggle with this year. It's big, strong, athletic forwards. You have some of that in Wilfred Zaha, but you really have that in Patrick Ojimeng. And provided he's playing and feeling fully fit, he did not play tonight, right? So he'll be fully rested. I think he could cause a lot of problems on that back line for the Fire, even just taking attention away from where it's needed elsewhere.
Just as an update, though, he did come on as a halftime sub against.
I didn't see
Orlando.
him come on a half. Either way, still 45 minutes is better than 90 in that respect. But regardless, still somebody who I think profile-wise could really bother them come Saturday. That will just about do it for us here in terms of things we actually have to talk about and discuss. As always, give us a follow on social media. Everything is Men in Red 97, Twitter, Instagram, all that kind of good stuff. Follow us there. Keep updated. You can always check meninred97.com. Tim posting his story on how the Bears' schedule is going to impact the Fire for the remainder of the season. So go check that out. There's always wonderful reporting from Tim, from Alex, from Max to keep you updated on all things Chicago Fire. And of course, wherever you're listening to this, if you could please subscribe, share. If you're on Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star rating. If you're on Spotify, give us a thumbs up and share it with some folks you want to talk Fire with. It's always good to have a friend to chat with. And when they know a little more ball, that certainly goes a long way. That'll do it for us, though. Thank you so much for joining us around the bonfire. It's been a pleasure to have you. We look forward to seeing you for the recap after what is hopefully a Chicago Fire victory. So thank you for being here. And as always, come on, you Men in Red.